Oakley,
I don't
sorry
have an hour,
about your
guys.
little legs.
Oh, you got it, Glenn?
Well, I do have a hard limit, guys. I'm sorry. The baby has got to get up, and we've got things that we have planned.
Selfish. I mean, you can't share this power.
You know how many conversations we have that end with, "Oh, the baby, I've got it." That's just a get out of jail free card.
Okay. All right.
Oh my! You've discovered my clever ploy.
All right, so I'll go fast then for the incarnation.
And Andrew, you can just step out whenever you like. Just quietly close the door to Skype, and we'll keep on keeping on. Thanks for showing up.
Okay, guys. Look, if I don't have anything else to say, I appreciate you both allowing me into this episode.
Yeah, and if you want to pop in 2 hours later while we're still going about the incarnation,
No. Once I hit the red button, man, that's that's freedom.
So yeah, before Dale gets going, I just want to apologize to Oakley, Tara's dog, for the extended walk that he is getting with his poor little legs. They're probably 2 hour legs, but this is probably going to be a 3.5 hour walk. My apologies. Dale?
I love it. Okay. So with the Trinitarian controversy basically solved with the Council of Nicaea for most Christians, and the Council of Constantinople in 381, which sort of corrected some of the language issues with the original Creed of Nicaea. Then we get into what I call the incarnation debates, and this lasted from the late 4th century and up until the 7th century AD. And this is debating, the Bible clearly says Jesus was God, he was Yahweh, he shared that divine identity, and he was clearly a human being. Suffered, died, he was tempted, he didn't know things, he was a human being. So the incarnation debates are, so we've solved that Jesus is God, we've solved that Jesus is human. How the heck does that make sense? How do we work within those parameters to make a coherent notion? So just to give some relevant historical background, there are fundamentally, again, two principal schools on this front. So the first is called the monophysite position. This was condemned as a heresy. It's also known as logos flesh, or comes from Alexandria, so the Alexandrian notion of Christology. And monophysite Jesus has one nature. That's what they believe. Sort of like a hybrid nature where, or I think it's called theoanthropic, where the divine nature and the human natures combine and mix to form one sort of hybrid or deified nature that's sort of like a hybrid or mixture of the human and the former divine nature. Then there's the second position, which is the orthodox position, the position I'm going to be arguing for, the diophysite position, also called logos man, or it comes from Antioch, so the Antiochian Christology. This says, nope, Jesus had two complete natures, one divine, one human. He was 100% fully divine, he was 100% fully human. And that later on, so there's certain, so in the first place, what is a nature? I should explain that. What does it mean to have a human nature or a divine nature? So in philosophy, a nature simply means that, it lists out all the essential properties or attributes that are distinctive of a particular kind of thing. So Jesus had all the necessary or essential attributes of exemplifying a divine kind of thing. He also had all the properties or attributes that are essential to representing or identifying a human kind of thing. And it's important to note that both sides of the debate, the monophysites and the diophysites, both all agreed that, Jesus did not give up his divine nature. He did not empty himself of properties like being omniscient or omnipotent and stuff like that. He didn't give up any essential properties of being the divine kind or divine nature. All he did was gain additional properties that were essential for being a human nature. So this isn't a transformational view like the pagans had, where Zeus is said to give up divinity to become a bull, and he has all the properties of a bull but no properties of being a god, and then somehow he switches back. So this isn't a transformational view in that sense. He has these different things. So basically, to illustrate how this works, so there were certain heretics that arose that took the extremes. The monophysite is sort of the extreme. Look, there's only one hybrid nature. So to picture it, picture a glass cup. There's one person, and he has two natures. The two natures are represented by water and wine. The glass is the one person. So if you pour water and wine into one person or glass, they mix and become one mixed substance or hybrid substance. Another analogy for the opposite end with Nestorius, who was a heretic, who advocated that he stressed, look, the two natures are complete, they're distinct, they're totally gone. They don't mix. There is no mixture. That's heresy. But what he did was say, effectively, not only is there two complete natures, but there have to be two wills. There's the divine will of the Logos, and there's the human will of Jesus. There are two souls, and this comes from Aristotle's notion of what it means to be human. So there's the human soul of Jesus. There's the divine soul of God. So this already contradicts my notion of the Trinitarian model, because the divine persons aren't souls. There's only one soul. But so basically he said, look, there are two persons, two natures. There's two cups, and then you pour water into one cup, you pour wine into another cup. This is not the model that I think is true. I take the path that the Council of Chalcedon made. And this happened in 451, and this distinguishes all imperial Christians, let's say. This led to the first split in church history between the Eastern Orthodox, Catholics, and Protestants. We all adopt the Chalcedon model, as I do. I think it's the correct one. But then there's the Syriac and Church of the East, which are basically heretics. They went on with either Nestorius in the Far East, going into China and India, or in Baghdad, they took on a monophysite position and stuff like that. So this represents the first split in church history. But the Chalcedon took a middle road. It said, no, look, the two natures are distinct, they are complete, and they added the thing, they don't mix. There's no confusion or blending of the two natures within the one person. So they stress without division, without any separation. So you don't have two glasses, you don't have two peeps. So basically the analogy for this is, look, we have one person, one glass cup, and I pour one nature, the water, and then I pour oil. The two don't mix. Oil just sits on top of the water. So he has two natures within the one cup or one person. So that's the analogy to try and understand the different positions on this historically. Now the creed itself doesn't say, well, how do you make sense of this? How does this analogy of one person with two natures being like oil and water, how does that work? And this is where I get into my victorious incarnation model, as I call it. So essentially with Chalcedon, I say, yep, I agree. There is one person who had two complete natures. And one was fully human, the other was fully divine. And we have to understand, when we're talking about natures here, we're talking about a kind nature as opposed to an individual nature or essence. And that's what the doctrine is getting at. So obviously Jesus only had one essence as a individual person and that sort of thing unique to him. He had the property of being having a human nature and the property of having a divine nature and that sort of thing. But the creeds are saying, look, he had two complete kind natures, right? One divine kind of nature, the other a human kind of nature. But yet he was one hypostasis, or one individual person. So I fully affirm this aspect. That I think you guys got that from the Council of Chalcedon and the analogies of the glasses and the liquids. The second element here is, okay, well, how the heck does Jesus acquire a human nature? And this is where you can't really rely on the ancients, because they had a mistaken notion of what a person was. What a nature, the human nature entailed. It comes from a false Aristotelian anthropology where they believe, well, you had your, a spirit, and the humans had an animal soul. They had a rational soul, or nous in Greek, and then they had their physical body. I reject all that. I just say, look, it's simple. There's a rational mind. That's the divine logos. Jesus in his pre-incarnate state had all the faculties sufficient for personhood, and that when that becomes embodied, so therefore that's the divine nature right there. And when that becomes embodied in a human body governed by the human genome, whatever scientists give to specify this is a human body, not a dog or chimp body or something like that based on the genetics, once that happens, a divine mind becomes embodied in a human body, then he takes on the human nature. There is no such thing as a human mind or a divine mind. There's just a mind. We are God. We are made in God's image. We are exactly like him in the sense that we are minds. We have a set of rational faculties. Now, there are differences in degrees. Obviously, he's omniscient and we're not. But that isn't inherent to the human nature that we aren't omniscient. This is what I'm saying. The divine mind gained a human body, and that's the essence of what a human nature is. It's a mind or person that is embodied in a human body, physical body governed by the genetics of a human Homo sapien. Boom. That's how he acquired, without losing his divine nature, that's how he acquired this Homo sapien model, Homo sapien nature. Now, the third element, this is where things get a bit tricky, because Jesus, in order to be biblically consistent, look, Jesus didn't know things. He was tempted by sin, and that was a true temptation, I would say. He wasn't in the Old Testament with these theophanies where I would say Jesus appears in human form. That isn't an incarnation. Jesus wasn't truly tempted. Jesus was basically Superman faking it. He had his divine, he was consciously omniscient. He was omnipotent and actively omnipotent, just manifesting himself in the form of a human body in the Old Testament. In the New Testament with the incarnation, the difference is, look, here he gets the divine nature or divine attributes were subliminal or subconscious, and depth psychology proves that minds have a conscious portion and a subconscious portion. So Jesus, in their divine nature, the divine persons are fully conscious. There is no subconscious mind. When Jesus became incarnate, his divine attributes became subliminal or subconscious, and this is why he doesn't know things, or he's depicted as he suffers pain like a human being and stuff like this. And this explains these human limitations of Jesus. Yet at the same time, there are aspects where the subconscious leaks through, and he gets some of his omniscient divine knowledge in certain things. And as a prophet, he makes these proclamations and stuff like that, because as we know from depth psychology, sometimes the subconscious leaks things into our conscious minds, or you have things like the Freudian slip, if you believe that. So like that's sort of the model that I think is happening with Jesus. His superhuman abilities were subliminal only during his time of humiliation on earth. Post-ascension, there's no more subconscious thing. He has his human body, but he is Superman again. He is consciously omniscient. He is actively omnipotent. He's regained his exalted position, as Philippians chapter 2 would say. So, although Philippians 2 is functional, not ontological, but yeah. So it's only during his time of humiliation that his divine becomes subconscious or subliminal. This is the model, and sometimes it leaks through. This is why we get prophecies and stuff like that. So yeah, Okay, so here's the issue then with this subliminal thing. Two things to mention. So in the first place, what is I described what the human nature is. Well, what about the divine nature? Is it essential that you have to be actively omnipotent or consciously omniscient, let's say? And I got into debates with Shabir Ali, who's an Islamic apologist, about this. And my argument is no, it's not essential to the Godhead for any divine person to be consciously omniscient. You can be subconsciously omniscient or potentially omniscient, and skeptics agree with this. It's the same distinction between, well, does God have to be actively loving versus just potentially loving? Is one greater than the other? And no, I think modal logic affirms, look, if X has the power to gain the power to do A, then X already has the power to do A. It just takes 2 steps to do that. And it's the same with omniscience or any of the other subliminal divine properties, I would say. In effect, it's the same thing. He does have the ability to go back to this if his either conscious or, I would say, more subconscious, because that's where the divine logos inhabits fully. I don't think Jesus, believe it or not, I'm not convinced that Jesus himself historically knew he was God prior to his crucifixion, or at least during his ministry. I'm open to the fact that Jesus wasn't consciously aware that he was God in the flesh during his ministry. If he was, great, I'll take that. That's so much better. But I'm not sure that's necessary. So long as the subconscious had the power to regain his divine nature, that's all that's necessary here. And this leads into the next one. Well, there are some damnable heretics, I would say, who are kenotic Christians or hold to kenotic Christology based on Philippians 2. They'll say this isn't Jesus had an ontological emptying of his divine properties. He wasn't even omnipotent subliminally, or he wasn't omniscient subconsciously. He shed his divine attributes. Like when you get a haircut, you shed your hairs are gone. They're no longer a part of you when he assumed the human nature. So he was fully human. But yet they'll say, well, he was still divine somehow. So basically they're saying omniscience, either potential omniscience or subconscious omniscience, and conscious or active omniscience, that's not an essential property of the divine nature. That's just contingent to the divine nature, and that is heresy. That is totally wrong. No, you can't get rid of that. It's basically they're saying Jesus had all the properties of being a regular, ordinary human being, and that's divine. So what's the difference? There's no distinction between a divine nature and a human nature, and obviously they're not identical. So this view is just heresy. And in addition, there are arguments that prove that God is necessary, and those specific properties, the maximally great making properties or maximally excellent making properties, are logically necessary to be a maximally excellent being and or a maximally great being. So yeah, the view that questions whether things like omniscience or omnipotence are contingent properties of God, no, that's an essential part of the divine nature, I would say. And therefore you have to go with this model that in explaining the Bible verses where Jesus does not display these divine properties in an active way, well, that's because that can be explained because they're subliminal or in the subconscious divine logos part of Jesus' mind. Yeah, that's my a helpful analogy that I think will help explain what I'm saying here comes from the movie Avatar, and it's not an exact now. There are holes with the analogy, but it'll help give you a sense of what I'm saying. So, in the movie Avatar by James Cameron, basically it posits, look, that there are genetically engineered alien Navi physical bodies that can be assumed by a human consciousness through some machine. I've never seen the movie, so I'm just going based on what I've heard about it. And that assumes, so you are a human consciousness that becomes subconscious. Your human body's asleep and your conscious mind is now indwelling a Navi body. You assume a Navi nature. The Navi is the name of the alien or whatever that they are. That's the type of alien. So they have a Navi nature, but simultaneously they still have their human nature. They're a mind that's embodied in a human body that's just asleep. They're subconsciously, and their conscious mind is inhabiting this Navi body, displaying a Navi nature and going about their business. So as incredible as it sounds, sinful Hollywood, degenerate Hollywood, if you're so against them and stuff, believe it or not, they support me. They support Christians. They help provide some insight of what the incarnation might look like. How can one person, one mind, simultaneously have two natures? There you go. That helps illustrate how one can have a human nature and a Navi nature. And if you can accept that, it's even easier to accept how Jesus' divine nature could assume a human nature. You don't even have the complication of having two physical bodies to deal with. So yeah, that's my case.
Okay.
You don't sound impressed.
No.
Okay.
So let's just start at the end. If you had seen the movie, you would know that they were called Navi.
Navi. Okay. Okay. What did I call them?
Something else.
Okay.
So yeah. So anyway, I think that's a fairly rough analogy for you. To be honest, when I saw it in your write-up, I thought it was a reach. So I'm not going to beat up on it for too long. I would just say that this is a man inhabiting a Navi suit. he's remote controlling a Navi body, but he never stops being a human. He's not Navi. He doesn't take on a Navi nature. He's just controlling a body. You can control a robot in the same way. That doesn't make you a robot.
Can I just ask, because I haven't seen the movie, but it's not like he's just playing like a video game controlling the character. His consciousness is actually indwelt in the Navi body.
Sure, but that's like saying you hooked up a bunch of electrodes so that you feel like you're inside the robot. It's still a human controlling a robot. So
right.
Whether you are tricked in a VR kind of way of thinking that you're inside the robot body, that's irrelevant. That's just a matter of interface. The fact of the matter is, you're still a human controlling a robot. You're not a robot.
No, that's. So I forget
about. You should watch the movie.
No, but look at this way. No, so a human, he retains his human nature, right? Because what is a human nature? It's a mind.
Yeah, he doesn't merely retain his human nature. He never stops being human at any point. He's human controlling a thing.
No, so
it's called an avatar.
Right.
And
no,
the whole idea of the avatar is it's a thing that is controlled remotely by another thing.
Put it this way.
Stand-in, a representative, if you will.
But okay, so try to focus. So he's still a human. He retains his human nature, right? Because what is the human nature? It's a mind that is embodied in a human body governed by the human genome. Contrary, on the other side, what does it mean to have a Navi nature? And I would say it's the same thing: a mind that is embodied by a physical body governed by the genetics of a Navi genome. He assumes the Navi nature. His conscious mind is embodied in this Navi nature governed by a Navi genome. At the same time, subconsciously, unconsciously, I'm assuming he's asleep when he's remote controlling this Navi thing, and his subconscious is still a human nature because it's a subconscious mind that's embodied in a physical body governed by the human genome. So he has both simultaneously. His conscious mind is in the Navi part, and his subconscious is in the human body.
So I do follow you. I've seen the movie a few times.
Okay.
Which gives me a little bit of an advantage. So,
Yeah.
so I would say maybe you should watch the movie and see if your analogy still holds up. And it could be just a matter of perennial debate over science fiction topics, which I can do for the next couple of hours because I'm that kind of nerd. But I wouldn't want to have that debate with someone who hasn't even seen the source material. So I wouldn't find it.
I'd love to
interesting.
ask a question.
Sure.
Sorry, I came back from the dead.
Who are you again?
love to ask a question. If we are granting for the sake of analogy that this kind of thing might be possible, that somehow we can throw our mind from place to place, it seems that we're also granting that through some technological means we can throw our mind from place to place, which appears to me to suggest that the mind is physical and not some other stuff that can be transmitted from place to place. So I'm not sure that the analogy's helping you a whole lot, because it seems to me that the analogy is more parsimonious with a mind being a physical thing that we think we might eventually manipulate, and so I think that's a problem.
That's true. And like I said, as one of my heroes that I worked with before he died, Houston Smith, he had a famous saying, look, every analogy is like a leaky bucket. It can only hold water so far. And
sure, there
are disanalogies, right? These are two.
Sure.
I'm just trying to get the point across that human nature, a single person or mind can have two natures simultaneously. If this stuff is possible, I don't believe it is possible. I would object to the notion of this avatar thing, but I'm just using it to illustrate that single point. Now, in God's case, remember that it's not like God doesn't have a physical body. He's an omnipresent spiritual soul who's omnipresent everywhere. And one of the minds simply becomes embodied in the human body, therefore acquiring the human nature. The divine nature doesn't have the problem of being, the divine nature is embodied over here. How do you transfer a mind over to the human thing over there?
Are you familiar? Your listeners ought to be able to look this up, even though I can't call the experiment by name. But we actually have successful examples of people being able to think thoughts with no physical, with no joystick, no trackpad, nothing like that. We simply hook sensors to their heads, and we can now move things like cursors on a computer screen on the other side of the internet.
So no, I wasn't aware of that. So like you.
Yeah, that's a real thing.
So how would that work? Just out of, not that it matters, but like cool, that helps make the avatar thing a little bit more plausible, I guess. But it reads like the electrical impulses or neurons in your brain, and then somehow translate that into computer code, submits that, and then the mouse is like a remote, is like it's got parts that it can move on its own based on that information. Is that how that would work?
Yeah. So I am not a lot more qualified to talk about this than either of you. So okay. Certainly there's code on both sides. There's the code that reads whatever sensors are placed around the head, right? So this was not an invasive kind of thing. This is just a band, sort of band that they put on the subject's head, and that's right. The band read the electrical impulses for up, down, left, right, that kind of thing. Transmitted what it thought it understood to a remote machine. By the way, I don't actually know that it was over the internet. It was over a network, and the computer on which the little ball was moved was not in the same room. right? And then they were able to talk back and forth to confirm that the person that was thinking about moving this ball or cursor or whatever, because the ball's just a stand-in for a cursor or whatever, they were able to confirm, yes, I intended to move it up. Oh, yeah, it moved up. I intended to move it down and left. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I guess the point there is that it does seem to confirm that our thoughts are physical things. Now, I don't think it's entirely dispositive of the conversation, but I do think that it at least requires explanation from the dualist perspective.
I guess so. This is fascinating. As I said, I didn't know about it, so this is why I like, you get to learn new things. But I don't think it's a problem for the substance dualist at all. It just implies, look, we've developed this set of correlations, this set of electrical impulses, or a specific set of electrical impulses in my brains, through asking you I'm thinking of an apple. Okay, this electrical process happened in your brain when you told me you were thinking of an apple. So now I correlate in computer language. When you see this electrical impulse, this equals thinking of an apple, or move up or move down, whatever.
Right.
Then you use that set of correlations. Again, it says nothing about the substance dualism debate at all. And then you use that communicate the information. The mouse has mechanics set up that it can read the information and then can move on its own in response to that program code. So it's just, I can fully accept that if it's true, and I have no reason to doubt it that it's true, but it's just not a problem at all. It doesn't.
I'll try to get the article so you can link it in your show notes.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I love that.
So that people can sort of follow along and
Gotcha.
Draw their own conclusions, because it seems only fair to try to make sure that they can do that based on the sort of nature of the claim, right? Because probably most people aren't familiar with it, and it can seem incredibly unlikely, right? So I'll do my best to get it over to you for the show notes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, a lot of our skeptics would love that. But yeah, I just, in terms of the point, I can fully accept this, and it's just not a problem at all. It's just using a set of correlations of electrical activity translated into computer information, and in order to understand the content, obviously the person has to reveal, this set of electrical activity, this means I want you to move up or I want you to move down. So you still require a personal subject. It doesn't prove that we're physical, certainly. So
well, but doesn't it work to say that that at least in order to demonstrate that thought is something more than physical, you have to be able to say how it is that the non-physical interacts with the physical to create these outcomes? Because otherwise, what you're left with, if you can't say that, is a set of physical properties that seem to be perfectly adequate to describe the nature of what's occurring. And so if you posit dualism, and I'm not saying that you can't, I'm willing to admit that this isn't entirely dispositive of the case for physicalism. But if you're saying that that some sort of substance dualism is at work here, you have to be able to explain how it is that this non-physical substance causes this high degree of correlation that you see.
So I would deny that. So in my my solo show, I don't know if you heard that, but in Substance Dualism Part 4, I list out some of the arguments against substance dualism, and the problem of interaction, how the interaction takes place is among them. But yeah, I would deny that this isn't a problem. I don't need to have a mechanistic explanation as to how the soul and the body stand in causal relations between each other in order to believe in it. I could be totally ignorant of that question. The second is that it might even be, it's probably a misnomer, because in terms of the soul versus body, it can be seen as a basic direct action. You're essentially looking for instrumental mechanisms, or, you know, like, oh, this leads to this, this leads to this, this leads to this. And that's sort of begging the question in favor of physicalism. Actually, in terms of the soul and the initial physical reaction, obviously, once the first physical reaction happens, then it's a series of dominoes down. There are instrumental causes. My C fibers go off, and the neuron pulse, you know, down to my finger or whatever's hurting. But in terms of that initial reaction or interaction between the soul and the first physical state, or vice versa, the last physical state in my brain translated to my soul, could be what's called a basic action. It's a direct action, and it doesn't make sense to ask for intervening mechanisms, because there are none. The second was the second.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No problem. I'll be quick. So the second thing is, I wanted to say in my solo show, Substance Dualism Part 2, I provided positive arguments that I think prove that various mental properties and states, like thoughts, have to be non-physical. Even assuming substance dualism is false, pretend we are our brain, at least with that first issue of contention, I can argue that the thoughts or the states are non-physical in nature. And I provided two arguments there, like the differences argument, as well as I'm sure you're aware of Thomas Nagel's the knowledge argument and that sort of thing. Yeah. So that's I would say we have the problem of actionism. Even though I confess I'm ignorant, I don't know how it works, apart from saying it just works as a basic, a direct action. There are no intervening mechanisms in that regard. But let's pretend there are somehow intervening mechanisms. I don't have to know what those are in order to advance substance dualism, especially since I have positive reasons to suspect that these mental properties and states are non-physical in nature.
So I think
I'm going to need to step in and cut short this conversation on substance dualism, which is interesting, but it takes us slightly further afield from the incarnation discussion, which itself still might last a little while.
I told you, that's why I put it as a presupposition. Yeah.
So didn't mean to take you off topic. It seemed to me as if the issue regarding avatars directly related to this particular bit, but perfectly happy to leave it for another time.
No, that was great. Thanks.
I suspect there will that despite everything that's been discussed, the board will simply be taken over by commentary on Avatar. So that's
James Cameron.
That's what happens. But so I'm going to, frankly, I've forgotten most of your speech, and so I'm probably going to say some things that will sound repetitive, and you'll say, yeah, but I responded to that. Well, sorry. You're going to just have to respond to them again. So let me see if I can start in a different place than where I had intended here, because of some of the ground covered. Talk to me, Dale, about human nature versus God nature. Are these different natures?
Yes, they're not identical.
Are they compatible?
Yes.
Okay, so what are the differences? What are some of the differences? What are some of the compatibilities?
And this is why your argument, your little premise argument fails. Premise 3 is you're basically just saying they're not identical, right? So that was my main criticism, is that doesn't mean that they're mutually exclusive or incompatible. So the human nature.
So I'm trying to suss that out. So
right. So the human nature is this. It is a set of cognitive faculties sufficient for personhood, aka a person. That becomes embodied in a physical body governed by the human genome. That's the essence of being a human.
Okay, say that again.
So it's a person, a set of faculties sufficient for personhood, whatever that might entail. We discussed that earlier, as to what some of the things are. I think that free will, sentient, intellect.
So far, all of that can be ascribed to my dog. So that doesn't actually tell me anything about a human nature.
But I don't believe you. Dogs are not persons, I would say.
Okay, you say that as a claim, and I get that, and saying it twice more and louder doesn't make it better. I'm just saying all of the things that you specifically named can apply to my dog, and so I haven't actually heard a description of personhood that wouldn't apply to a pet as advanced as a dog. And so I'm trying to get at what this human nature is versus the God nature. And right now, you're just describing the nature of any sentient being.
Well, listen, right? So in terms of the human nature, it is perhaps the dog nature. This is just complete rubbish. Dogs are not moral agents, for example. But let's pretend you're right. I can go along with you for the sake of argument. Let's pretend dogs are dog persons that are in a physical body governed by the dog genome. Humans are persons that are embodied in a physical body governed by the Homo sapien genome. Cats, they are persons that are embodied in a physical body governed by the cat genome. This is human nature, dog nature, cat nature.
Okay, so then we're defining it by the genome.
If all three are persons, yeah. So okay. I don't put it this way. I don't agree with your nature about dogs and that sort of thing. But
I don't agree with your assertion about what nature is either. So how do we solve it?
Here, so listen. Remember my avatar thing, right? The Navite. Maybe there's an intelligent alien out there that is a moral agent and has all these properties that I deny to dogs. Okay, well, great. So then it's the same thing. It's the genome. It's the physical body that distinguishes these persons from each other. Yeah. That's what.
So the human nature is the human genome.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, it's a mind.
And so what's the God nature?
No, but it's a person plus the human genome.
Right, and for me, it's just a genome. So that's fine. I'm trying to get your definition. So
yeah,
the person which you describe as that which contains a personality. I mean, you're kind of describing the word with a word. And it has a human genome. Personality plus human genome.
Say, if you're going by my definitions, person plus, because person.
Well, you never really gave me a good definition of person, and I've asked for 2 weeks, and so I keep trying to get that great definition that I can live with. Maybe you can just give it to me again.
Okay. All right. So
and try not to use the word person when you do it.
Well, wait. So it's a set of faculties sufficient for personhood. What does that mean? So number one, it's we are intelligent. We are sentient. We are moral agents. We have free will. These are some of the things that I've offered. We have a personality. A personality is a part of being a person. We have certain character traits. So that's why I'm saying personalities are not identical to a person. A person is more encompassing. It includes our personalities, which can change. The person is maintained through personality changes and that sort of thing. So that's why
what you're really saying is a person is the total package of a person. I'll try to work with that. That's not terribly useful, but when we add the human DNA, I'll go with that. So it's a person with human DNA. That's a person.
Yes, that's a human nature.
Right. Okay.
So you are an instance of the human nature. You are a person that has a physical body governed by the human genome.
Okay. So what's a God nature?
The divine nature. So remember, there are two senses of a divine nature. So the divine nature proper is not exemplified in any. The three persons of the Trinity are not instances of the full divine or complete divine nature. Only the Godhead is that, right? Because one of the essential properties of the divine nature proper is being tripersonal. God the Father is not tripersonal. God the Son is not tripersonal. And
let's just deal with God the Father for a moment. God the Father individually. If we can speak of God the Father individually, I think we can. So what is he?
Yeah, so in the second sense with the divine nature, these are all the essential divine properties of the complete divine nature that are inherent to persons. So knowledge is an attribute that a person has. So in God's case, that's omniscience, because he's all-knowing, he's all-loving, he's all powerful. So these are the kinds of things that apply to the secondary sense of divine nature on a personal level. So Jesus is omniscient, he is omnipotent, he's omnibenevolent. These are the features of the divine nature. Oops.
That was just Andrew signing off, I think.
No, he gave an image or something. Andrew, are you still? Oh, he's muted. You sent an image.
Yeah, I'm still here. I was trying to put you guys on speaker. Apologies.
Okay, let's get back to what you're saying then. Yeah.
So yeah, these are things that I would say make up the divine nature. As to, again, this is why we get into, is something like eternality. Does that apply to the divine persons? I would say yes. Some have said that it only applies to the Trinity. I think that only makes sense in relations to persons. But logical necessity, for example, that only applies to the Trinity as a whole. And the three persons are logically necessary in that they derive from that overall being a part of the Godhead.
Okay.
So that
I'm lost. I'm trying to break it down a little bit so that I can follow you without being
okay. Well, let's just say this. Minimally, it's being omniscient, benevolent, and omnipotent.
Okay, and all three persons of the Godhead have those same characteristics.
Yes.
So would you say they have the same DNA?
No, not. They have the same.
If they have all of the same characteristics, how are they not the same person? They all have the same knowledge. They all have the same love. They all have the same everything. So in what way are they different persons?
Okay, so put it this way: they do have different properties. So for example, under your view, God the Son has the property of being begotten. God the Father has the property of being unbegotten. If you reject that, God the Son has the property of having a human nature. God the Father.
Let's go before the human nature, though, because we're getting there, but that gets crazy pants. I'm just trying to understand the most basic unit of what these three people are compared to what we are, so that we can begin to talk about mixing different natures. I'm trying to understand how they are persons, and I'm starting to get a picture, I think. But now you're saying, their personhood depends on their properties, and part of their property is, what they know and how they feel and that's all the same. So I'm trying to figure out how they are different.
Okay, so here's how they're distinct centers of self-consciousness or sentience. They are an I. They stand in I-thou relations to each other. That is that is the distinguishing feature that the Bible itself uses to distinguish God the Son from God the Father. Now, in terms of them sharing certain properties, that doesn't mean that they're identical. And me and you share the same property of having a human genome. That doesn't make us.
But we don't know the same things. Our minds are not constructed, synapses and so forth, in the same way. So we are different persons by my definition, because we have different brains and we have different thoughts. And but this is not what you're saying about God. So I'm a little bit confused by that.
They have different properties in the minimal sense that they have their own unique individual centers of self-consciousness. They have their own self-awareness that is not shared by the other two members of the Trinity, and that alone is enough to distinguish them as distinct concrete individuals or persons. even though they also have some properties that are the same, that are exemplify a divine nature. They are each instances of the secondary sense of divine nature. Just like
yeah, but part of the divine nature is that there are three of them. So that
that's part of the first sense of the divine nature.
First sense, right? And I'm mostly trying to deal with the second sense. I don't even know if I will be able to limit it to the second sense. But in the second sense of the divine nature, they all have the same thoughts, because they all know everything and they're all in sync with each other. So that's where I get confused about how they're different persons. You and I don't have the same thoughts. We don't have the same body of knowledge either. So you know things that I don't. I know things that you don't. I have experienced things that you haven't. We are going to come at things in different ways. But if we both had the exact same patterns of thoughts and knew exactly everything perfectly the same, I don't know that we would be different persons.
So they don't. They have different thoughts. God the Son has the thought that I am incarnate, or I am dying on the cross, or I am God the Son. God the Father doesn't know that. That would make him a schizo. He knows that you are God the Logos. You are God the Son. You are incarnate. So they do have different thoughts. Otherwise, that would be.
Then they do have different bodies of knowledge. Then, and it's not right to say that they all know everything, because they don't. They don't know what the other person is experiencing, for instance.
So there's not. It's logically impossible. So there isn't a knowledge proposition that God the Father. It's logically impossible for God to have a proposition that I am God the Son. That's not a thought. That's not a proposition that exists. It's like saying there's no stone that God can make that's so heavy you can't lift it. There is no such thing, and there is no such thought as God the Father knowing He is God the Son.
God the Father doesn't know what it's like to suffer on a cross, for instance, because He's never done it.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, so then they don't know the same things. They don't all know everything.
Correct. So it depends. Okay, how do you define omniscience? Omniscience is defined as God has knowledge. All three of the persons have knowledge of all the true propositions. So that doesn't include experiential knowledge or knowledge by acquaintance, which are unique to the individual. Only Jesus the Son knows what it's like to experience death on the cross. That, by the way, humans, I have knowledge that none of the three persons of the Trinity do. I know what it's like to sin, or to get sinfully peeved off at Darren Lute if he leaves a comment, and I call him an ignorant, foolish skeptic or something like that. God doesn't know what it's like to sin. He doesn't have experiential knowledge. He has the propositional knowledge that sinning is evil, evil is bad.
He also doesn't know what it's like to lust, or what the forces are of something like lust that drive people to do things.
Not in his divine nature. Jesus did in his human nature.
So we're gonna talk about that. But I'm just trying to get some of this nailed down, because you see, as a Christian, I would have said, no, God knows that. I wouldn't have been able to explain how I thought He knew it, but if He didn't know it, I wouldn't have thought He was God. I think that would be problematic if you are saying that the God of the universe, who created us with these urges, has no idea what that's like, and yet He dares command us regarding them.
I don't think you need experiential knowledge. As long as you have propositional knowledge, that's enough as a foundation or basis to give.
No, I think you do need experimental knowledge, Dale. An example would be if I, as a God, created a being and I gave them the sensation of itching. Now, I've never itched before, but I gave them the sensation of itching, and I gave them a command never to scratch. Well, that's absurd. I would be a terrible God. The people should rise up and kill me if they could.
No, Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, but I mean that's kind of how this God is, who commands us to do or not do with sensations. He has no idea what forces are being dealt with.
He doesn't know what they feel like experientially, but he does
what
know
they feel like experientially is everything. That is the human experience.
No, it's not. It's Adam and Eve were human beings. They had no idea experientially what sin. This is what the tree of knowledge of good and evil is about. They gained experiential knowledge, or knowledge by acquaintance, of good contrasted with evil once it's actualized. They still sin because they had a propositional knowledge to know that it was wrong to do that, and that's all that's required. God propositionally knows the sufficient body of knowledge to know what it's that telling a lie or raping someone is sin. He knows the propositions. This causes great damage to the women.
He knows it's sin, but what he doesn't know is what forces, the urges in the body that he created, push us to. So if he doesn't have any type of experiential understanding of that, he was irresponsible to create such bodies, and then I would say a grand amount of hubris to dare command us regarding our own qualia.
Yeah, I just fundamentally disagree with that. I think the propositional knowledge is enough of a foundation to give such moral commands. You don't
I can assure you that the propositional knowledge about sex does not come close to explaining sex. If you've never had it and all you have is the greatest, most detailed definitional, propositional knowledge of sex, but you've never had it, you don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah, that's complete bullshit. I think it's the same. Oh, sorry. I mean, that's complete.
My favorite part of the podcast. I will not edit this out.
It's because I got tricked by saying "damn," which I'm allowed to do because I'm using it technically. And then okay, sorry.
I love it. Trust me.
What the heck was I saying? My beaver.
See, you have experienced something that before was merely propositional knowledge.
Oh, well, that's my first time experiencing swearing, but I wish I could. But okay, so what the heck was I saying? Yeah. I had a good point. The propositional one is a firm enough basis. The experiential knowledge is not required, but I had something specific I was going to say.
I was talking about sex. And I was saying that if all you know is the best propositional knowledge about it, then you don't know anything about sex.
Oh,
because it must be experienced.
Okay, so this is kind of like saying it's the same stupid point of like, let's pretend a judge is judging someone who's a rapist, and they've never raped anyone. They've never experienced what it's like to rape. They can't judge. The guy can just say, hey, you don't know what it's like to have the desires that I had. I couldn't help myself. I had to go for that woman. Look at her. I mean, my goodness, how could you not go after that? And the judge is like, you know what, you're right. I haven't had the experience of lusting that bad and actually the experience of raping. I can't judge you. I can't. My propositional knowledge that raping someone causes emotional damage and that it violates the law, I can't use that. I have to experience it myself. So, all right, line up, let me have at it, and then I can judge you whether you're good or bad. No, that's rubbish. You don't need experiential knowledge. Propositional knowledge is good enough to adjudicate on these matters.
Yes, but I don't think that we can equate an antisocial behavior like rape with a perfectly natural and social behavior like sex. So those are different things. We were made for sex. We weren't made for rape by the Christian way of thinking. And good society thrives on sex. It doesn't thrive on rape. And so even from the naturalist perspective, I think we can make a distinction. So I think that's kind of a false thing to say, that we have to understand experientially what rape is to know that it's bad. We can see the results of it. But if we want to know what human sexuality is, you can't just read about it in a book. And so that's all I'm saying. And I think that there are good reasons to know what human sexuality is. There aren't good reasons to know what rape is. So God has given us certain orders based on just human sexuality. And what you're telling me is he doesn't know what the heck he's talking about. He makes these orders, but he has no idea.
Right. He has no idea experientially what lust feels like, the qualia of lusting or sinning. And he created us for sex, godly sex within marriage. He didn't create human beings to... all of our faculties, even sexual ones, are corrupted by sin. So it's not necessarily good just because you feel it's quote unquote natural. It's not actually natural. That's sin corrupting all of our natural faculties and that sort of thing. But sex
so
itself
that
is
this
good.
doesn't get too bogged down in sex. Calm down, people. It's not that kind of podcast.
Tara will love it, I bet.
And honestly, I wouldn't be talking to Dale if it was that kind of podcast. Talking to someone else. Andrew, for instance, we might have that discussion. Stay tuned. Who knows what's coming up on Still Unbelievable.
You were trying to keep us on topic, and you're just
doing my best.
begging.
Doing my best.
Just begging.
I spoke of the devil. Sorry. So, Jesus, then. So I'm zeroing in on this, what makes the human nature and the God nature. Let's enter Jesus, and let's exit the whole Avatar thing from my mind. That kind of ruins the thing for me. It's hard for me to imagine that. Jesus was born, so he wasn't. Before in the Old Testament, we have God incarnating all over the place. He's shape-shifting. He's God in heaven. Now he's an angel on earth. This is what I call shape-shifting. He's just taking on different shapes. Jesus goes through this pantomime of doing something more than shape-shifting. I argue that it actually couldn't be anything more than shape-shifting. So Jesus is born to a woman, and as if to pantomime the process of making real humans, as opposed to just shape-shifting into a 30-year-old man and doing a 1 year or 3 year ministry, depends on which gospel you read. So let me just ask you before I presume, was Jesus actually born as a human, or was he more of what I'm calling a shapeshifter?
So in the Old Testament theophanies, as I said in my outline, this is what you call a shapeshifter thing. God's divine nature was not subliminal or sublimated in any way, except for the fact that he took on the form of a human body. But he wasn't limited, and he was fully consciously omniscient, actively omnipotent. His divine nature was not sublimated in those Old Testament accounts. Only when he's in the quote-unquote true incarnation of the New Testament does his divine nature become sublimated, and that's the fundamental difference.
Okay, so when Jesus popped out of Mary, was he an actual human baby?
Yeah.
With human DNA?
Yes.
Can you have human DNA without a father's DNA?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes. It's supernaturally formed, but God
well,
obviously
is it human without DNA of a human mother and a human father?
Yes. He has 46 chromosomes.
What are the other 23?
The Homo sapien genome. What?
What are so if we say that 23 of them are Marys, which I'm not sure I'm not sure that we can, as the way the story is told. What are the other 23?
I don't know. They're not from a biological father, but that is
they're not human.
No, they are. That's not essential. Having prior sex.
Andrew,
No.
just asking about the scientific question here. If we today put together a creature and we took 23 female chromosomes and 23 chromosomes of bonobo, would it be human?
No. Oh, he's on mute. I don't think he can.
So why would it be human if we take 23 God chromosomes?
God.
I'm here. What was the question? My apologies.
Yeah, so Dale and I had a little bit of a difference of agreement about whether Jesus was human. I asked because earlier Dale made a big deal about human DNA. And I asked if Jesus was born a human baby. He says yes, with human DNA, yes. And so I asked him if he was sure about that. He said yes, but the DNA of Jesus doesn't involve a human male. So how could that be human DNA? And so I was just asking you, as a matter of science, if you do not have 23 from a human female and 23 from a human male, do you have a human?
Okay, I've got to acknowledge all the way around that this is a part of the Jesus story that I never understood. If God contributed the 23 male chromosomes, Jesus was just a guy. And if God didn't contribute 23 male chromosomes, or 23 from the father, a human father, I don't know what he contributed. And if he contributed something other than human chromosomes, and in essence the Y portion of this whole thing, right? Because Jesus is supposed to be a guy. If he didn't contribute that, then no, Jesus wasn't all human.
By definition, he wasn't at all human.
Right, but we've got a further problem, and this is one that I don't think it gets brought up very often. But the truth is that all humans start life as females. It is only later, not much later, but some later,
About 10
in the developmental process, where we become male. Yeah. And so this idea that God contributed what he contributed, and then there's this Jesus character, and I don't buy the whole biology part of it. It seems like absolute nonsense to me. I don't get it, and I challenge anyone to make sense of the story the way it's told. And how long did God hang around inside Mary? There should be an ick factor in this story.
Oh, Andrew. All right.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, I expected better for you. All right.
Look, the biology is not my fault.
Okay. All right. Okay.
It's not my fault.
Oh, right. So let me answer this way then to circumvent David's little objection. So number one, God is a supernatural being. He can create DNA ex nihilo. No Christian would deny that. It's not a problem. Number two, okay, if you're going to, I don't agree with this, but let's insist that, you need the DNA of a human male to combine with the female or something like that. Okay, God ex nihilo created Joseph's DNA to combine with Mary's, informing Jesus in the womb. Bible doesn't contradict that. There's no explanation of the mechanics, so I can just make that up, and there you go. You got 23 chromosomes from the man, Joseph. Just wasn't obtained in a fun way. It was obtained by God putting it there ex nihilo. As to the female, I just say, so what? What's the problem? The divine logos, it identifies as a male, and it was in a female body until the hormones, until the proper stage came around. What's the problem? Like, why
the problem is that this hasn't been demonstrated to be true.
And it's about 6 weeks. I think I said 10 minute ago. It's about 6 weeks that gender starts to differentiate.
That could be right. I
what
don't
isn't
actually
true?
remember.
What do you mean isn't true? That we're a female? It is true that we are a female for the 6 weeks.
No. What hasn't been demonstrated to be true is that there's a God out there who manufactures from nothing 23 chromosomes and somehow gets inside this young girl's body and implants this DNA material that is supposed to be human or not human. I mean, if you can make it up that that God magically also got inside Joseph and took some of Joseph's DNA. I mean, look, we can. Why
not just let them have sex? if you're going to do that.
The point is, we can create all kinds of wild speculation, and at least one explanation that is equally plausible is that Jesus wasn't human.
Right. I mean, by definitionally, and I'm talking your definition, Dale, because I asked about the whole human nature and so forth, and you gave me DNA. I wasn't necessarily going to go there. But if DNA is any part of the definition, then by definition, Jesus wasn't human.
No, he was. He had Joseph and Mary's DNA, created ex nihilo. It's a supernatural event. I get that skeptics don't believe in the supernatural. Tough. Christians do.
No.
Christians
okay, but we don't. But Joseph wasn't any part of this. We don't have that. We don't have the story where Jesus miraculously had Joseph's eyes. The story is that the Holy Spirit came upon a virgin who was untouched by Joseph.
It is not that skeptics don't believe the story. It is that the story hasn't been demonstrated to be true.
The story is incoherent.
I think he's saying it's not demonstrated to be true.
I mean, my whole argument is that the story is incoherent.
Okay,
so part of the coherence thing. There you go. Okay, yeah, part of the coherence thing. You're saying it's DNA.
Who's
the story
talking
gives
now?
us. Skype is probably having some breakdowns because we have been on it for a while.
Yeah, Skype is.
Okay, I'm going back on mute and going back to my corner, but you said, what do you mean it hasn't been proven to be true? Well, I can equally as easily say Jesus was an alien. He had 23 alien chromosomes. It is equally likely. I know that you want to say that it was Joseph or whatever. First of all, that's not in any account that I've read, pretty broadly.
Sure.
So I mean, you can make that up. That's fine. Yeah. You can make up that God created it ex nihilo. He created some male DNA from nothing, or he hung around in Mary's body and did the magic trick later on. I mean, you can create all kinds of stories about this, but it's equally likely that Jesus just wasn't human. If indeed there was a guy who was supposed to be the supernatural gift to humanity.
Okay, so that's not equally likely given the biblical data. He was fully human. However he got there, he had to be fully human. And you're right, I can't prove my story or.
Hold on, the biblical data, the biblical data is the thing that can't be trusted here, because as far as we know, humans come from humans. They don't come from gods. And so what you're having to do to say the biblical data is you're having to ignore everything that we just talked about biology. So I don't find the biblical data to be particularly interesting.
We also know that the people who wrote the biblical story just didn't understand DNA. They didn't understand the process very well. So this is not an insult to them. They just didn't know.
No, and I'm going back to my corner now, so Skype doesn't get mad.
So, all right, thank you, Andrew. So who had sex to have Adam and Eve come in? They had human DNA. No one had sex, and yet they're humans.
I would argue whether they did have human DNA, because the way the Bible describes them, they could live for 900 odd years. So I don't know. I don't think that story makes a lot of sense either. And by the way, for the record, you keep vacillating over whether you take that story literally or non-literally, and so I can't really keep up there. So are you taking it literally this week?
I would say that I take literally, and I always have. I've never been inconsistent, that Adam and Eve are actual historical figures. They constitute the first human beings with souls created ex nihilo by God, and they were created.
So I have not had that strong of a statement from you about that, so that's fine. I'm glad to know where you landed there.
The story. Right. So the story of human DNA doesn't provide for the truth of the Adam and Eve claim. It's that easy. The story of the progression of evolution doesn't point to an original human man and woman. And it's not even controversial. Well, sorry.
Here's my so Andrew, you're entirely correct. I agree with you, and I agreed with you at the beginning of the show. Remember, though, I'm not claiming to be able to prove that the virgin birth is true. I'm not trying to prove the Trinity or the Incarnation are true. I'm just, at least in this show, I'm just trying to prove that it's logically coherent. The models I give are logically coherent, and that they're biblically consistent. Yeah. So,
but my job here is to show that it's not, in fact, logically coherent. And so when I bring these things up, it is in service of saying, well, but you're saying that Jesus is fully human. We haven't even gotten to fully God yet. You've defined human in a very different way. That is not consistent. Once again, if I combine 23 human woman and 23 with a bonobo male, and if somehow that came out, which it wouldn't, what you would get is something that's not human. You couldn't simply call it human, even if it looked like a human. That's definitionally not a human. And so if God has done some kind of non-human magic to make this Jesus figure, it's an avatar of some kind, but it ain't a human.
Well, and Dale, I don't have a problem with the things that you're saying. I do have a little bit of frustration with the story, so if that comes across, my apologies. It's not at all directed at you personally in any way. But back at the beginning, I said that there's a bit of confusing the map for the place here. Right. And this is just that thing written large again. So in fact, I said, I had no idea this was coming, but I said then that, you can make any kind of sense that you want to out of biblical, well, not any kind of sense. There are certain conclusions that are more likely from the biblical story than others. But so I don't want to paint with too broad a brush. But the point here is that you're trying to put something on the map, the biblical story, that the evidence that we have simply doesn't agree with. You're trying to put something on the map that doesn't appear to exist with Adam and Eve. And the story of human DNA, the story of human evolution, doesn't appear to have this idea of Adam and Eve in the actual place of human evolution, regardless of whether you can make sense of it out of the biblical map.
Okay, yeah, I guess, so that's true. Again, that's true. But I guess I would just question, who is the one drawing the map? Maybe your map, as the skeptic, is the wrong map, because your map, by definition, says that supernatural is not included. It's incoherent. There isn't a destination for me to pin. I assume you would take out God, God existing, a supernatural being. So, yeah.
But that's not what I've said. That's not at all what I've said.
That's what
to you, at least between you and I in the past, and not on this show. I'm completely willing to accept that there can be something called the supernatural if you can demonstrate it. But right now, what we have as demonstration is is the history of human evolution, written large through our DNA, and we can track back the regular progress of the human form. And at no place in this tracking back, as we move back to less complex organisms, at no place do we see an Adam and Eve road sign. And so maybe I've got the wrong map. Okay, fine. But if you've got a superior map, that map should at least point to some real things that I can hang my hat on. And right now, the Adam and Eve story isn't it, because the real data that we have says there's no Adam and Eve.
So let's see.
So I don't have a problem with supernatural.
Let's try probing the next bit of this, because it started with me asking if Jesus was an actual human or just a kind of a shape-shifted avatar, a human suit. Okay, so setting that aside for just a moment, I would say that Jesus doesn't pass the DNA test, at least as I understand DNA. But let's just see how good his human suit was that he was wearing. So, Dale, could Jesus have sinned?
I think he could have, but in light of his omnibenevolence, he would never. Sorry, he would never do so. It's the same thing I said when we sort of got into this. Can God sin? And obviously, in light of his own internal nature, the answer is it's logically impossible for that to happen. But that is the constraint, his own internal nature. So
but Jesus was human. Humans can sin, yes?
Yes.
Okay. There's nothing within us constraining us from sinning.
Well, that's not true. Our moral conscience.
Okay, but that doesn't stop us from sinning. That may let us know that we've sinned, but that doesn't constrain us from sinning.
We'll put it this way: it's not. So number one, it's not an inherent. Our sinful nature is not an inherent part of humanity. So it's not that we have to sin to be human.
We'll get there. We'll get there. But you're saying that Jesus could have sinned.
Yes.
Okay. So
also God could sin. If you remember, we discussed this very early on in the.
Right. So you understand that's a very controversial position. This is not so much a gotcha. I just did a quick search to see to take the temperature of the moment. It seems that good Christians, good, well-studied Christians, are saying no. Jesus could not have sinned.
Yeah,
they have very many theological reasons why he couldn't have sinned. So you think that Jesus was of the stuff that he could have sinned, that it was possible?
Yes, in the same sense that you could say that about God. Like obviously there is no logical.
Would say that God can't sin either. So
I know.
I think that even Christians who are hearing you now are scratching their head and thinking, no, but God can't sin.
As a counterfactual, so what I do? There's no logically possible world in which God and Jesus in his human nature sin. Their divine natures prevent that from ever coming about. But yeah, I do think conceptually, like the temptation to sin was real on Jesus' part. He could have.
Well, wait a minute.
Sinned.
So I'm confused now, because you said just now that their divine nature kept them from doing it. I asked you if there was anything that kept him from sinning, and you said he could sin. If he could sin, then his divine nature wasn't keeping him from doing it. If his divine nature was keeping him from doing it, then he couldn't sin.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm talking at a bit of a higher level.
Come down here with the normal people for a minute. Could he sin or not? I'm not quite that high. Could Jesus sin, or was there something constraining him from being able to do it?
It's hard without the. All right, I'm gonna. Okay, let's take this answer. So let's say no. It's logically impossible for Jesus to sin. Let's take that route and see where you go.
I would go, then he's not human.
Why is that part of the human essence? I already defined the human nature, and he had it. Being able to sin or not being able to sin is not a part of the human nature.
Well, it depends on what side of the theological tree you fall off of, I guess, because once again, I don't know if most is correct here, and maybe Andrew has some insight on that, but most of the preachers that I know would say that humans have to sin, that we are in a state of sin, that part of the human condition is that we sin, and that you cannot live a perfect life. It is not just that no one has lived a perfect life, it is that we cannot live a perfect life. So
that was my understanding theologically.
Yeah, that's so. I mean, now, Andrew and I fell from the same theological branch for a lot of this too, so that that may not be a big sample size, but I was I palled around with not just Church of Christ, but with United Methodist and with the evangelical covenant churches. Now, one might say those are also not all that different, but I didn't encounter, at least in my recollection, preachers who were saying that Jesus, that Jesus could sin, and that B, that we could somehow avoid sinning. I think the whole point is that we can't avoid sinning, which is why we need Jesus. If we could avoid sinning, we wouldn't need Jesus.
So, but sinning is not an inherent part of the human nature. So it's true, I agree with you, that the Bible says human beings in their sinful state. Jesus wasn't in a sinful state. We are in a sinful state. We can't help, without God's help, we can't help from sinning.
Okay, but Adam and Eve wasn't in a sinful state either. And I remember on a show from last year, I don't remember the name of the show. People just go back and listen to all of them. This will be an early one, I think, when we're talking about Adam and Eve. And I ask you very specifically, Adam and Eve, so they didn't have a sin nature. Could they have not sinned? And you said no. Are you changing your answer now?
No, I didn't say that. I said yes, they could have. They could have not sinned. There's a counterfactual where they didn't sin or eat the fruit. But it's just the case that there is no feasible world where they don't sin, where they don't choose to sin. Every possible world that God creates, it just so happens that they use their free will to sin. But that doesn't deny that.
That is, in fact, what you said. And I confused that for what I said. And it still sounds a lot alike to me. So I don't fully.
Yeah. That's the distinction that I'm having. That's the distinction that I'm having with God. That's why I'm sort of giving mixed answers, and I just said, okay, fine, I'll just go with the simplistic thing of he can't. But is there a counterfactual where God can sin and he can sin or not sin, and in every possible world he just doesn't sin because of his own free will? He's morally perfect and that sort of thing. So that's sort of why I'm struggling in oscillating.
So modologically, Jesus couldn't sin.
Yeah, there's no feasible, logically possible world where Jesus sins.
Excuse me. And modologically, there is no world where humans wouldn't sin.
Correct.
So it is, once again, just rhetorical to me to say that our natures are the same.
Well, it depends on how you define nature, and that's not an element or an inherent element of what it means to have a human nature. So, for example, I disagree with this, but Catholics, many Christians, believe that when we get to heaven, we lose the ability to have free will in terms of choosing to sin or not to sin. I don't believe this, but there are so many that believe on death, our characters crystallize in a state of salvation. So it's impossible for me to even sin in heaven. I'm like an angel. I'm just stuck being morally perfect for all eternity from that point on.
But the angels could sin.
That's exactly. That's why it doesn't work. But I'm just
still
saying.
Do.
Well, yeah, but I agree with that. That's why I don't agree with this position. But I'm just explaining to you how the angels that didn't rebel in Satan's thing, they're crystallized. There's never going to be another angelic rebellion. Same deal with us. Once we're in heaven, there's never going to be a point where the saved, you know what, the heck with God, I'm going to sin. I'm going to lie.
You know, there's never going to be another angelic rebellion. They're still sinning. The reason we know that is because Paul said that we would judge the angels, and if they weren't still sinning, then we wouldn't have anything to judge.
I do know people that hold that hold to the position that Dale.
I do too, but those people don't know their Bible very well. I'm just,
This isn't my position. I agree with you guys that we can be able to sin, right? But this is a Catholic position. Your soul crystallizes in the state upon death, so you can't sin in heaven. And I'm using this to show that, look, it's if unless that's incoherent, that notion is incoherent, which it's not. Obviously, being able to choose to sin or not to sin is not, and having the ability to sin or not to sin is not necessarily an inherent part of the human nature.
okay, well, I don't even know that the creature that's supposed to be resurrected and goes to heaven is what I would call human either, because the human genome, allows for sickness and death, and that body wouldn't. So I'm not entirely sure in what ways it would be human.
Yeah, let me rephrase that. So it is still human in a resurrected state. Disembodied souls are not humans, but So let me just qualify that. At all times, what I just said, that it's not having the ability to sin or not sin at all times in history is not an essential element, but it is an essential element temporarily. Story of Adam and Eve, that's what it's about. So, and I said libertarian free will is part of being a person. So I did need to make that qualification that we have the free will, and then it can be taken away from us at some point.
Okay, so once again, just keeping focus on the coherence of this Jesus idea of being human. It doesn't seem to work DNA-wise, and also doesn't seem to work will-wise either, because it maybe will is the wrong word, but we seem to have a propensity for sin that Jesus does not, and in no logical world could possibly have. And so once again, I question your assertion that he was tempted in the same way. For instance, I don't know that it is possible for Jesus to look at a woman when I am of a certain mood the way I would look at a woman, whether she was or wasn't my wife. My wife is in the other room, by the way. I have to be very careful around this. A steak dinner might be in my future. I'll have to come up with some kind of apology. But here's the thing. I mean, the fact is that's just what it is. I am that type of creature that reacts in a certain way to certain stimuli. Period. And so if you're saying, well, Jesus couldn't have reacted that way, then he wasn't human in that sense either. And what you're calling a temptation for Jesus just doesn't map onto what I understand a temptation to be.
Okay, so as to the DNA, I did solve that because God creates supernaturally and ex nihilo a complete.
Sure, you solved it. We'll see in the comments whether you did or not.
That's logical coherent. He did that without neither.
Not coherent. Go ahead.
Well, so long as the supernatural is coherent, then it works.
So long as we can just make anything up, so that when an argument crashes, we can just make up a shield. But look, we're beyond that. So tell me, how is Jesus? How does this temptation work?
Right.
If he can't sin, how's he tempted?
Right. So I would say that, number one, he can sin, right? I was just giving that argument for the giving the Catholic perspective about that it's not necessarily a part of the human nature as I define.
Do you know the Catholic perspective on whether he could sin? I mean, I'm sorry, on whether he was actually tempted the way we're tempted?
Yeah.
He actually felt the urge to sin?
Yeah, they would say that he actually felt the urge to sin. He did look. He was tempted to look at a woman just exactly like you look at your wife or something like that. He was a sexual being just like every human. Are you guys still there?
Yeah. No, I'm just processing that idea. So I'm just trying to figure out how far this goes. I talk about doubt in different degrees. Christians, when they want to talk about this, they're actually talking about something that I call doubt light. I have various degrees and stages of doubt, and so that's a different subject. I only bring that up because I think that temptation probably works the same way. There's probably a temptation light that I think that Christians are talking about, and actual temptation that I'm talking about here. I'm just wondering if that doesn't apply to what you think Jesus felt. Because in order to get to what I think of as temptation, you actually have to have the urge and desire to do a thing and then just barely not do it.
Yeah, I would, in the full sense, I personally believe, and I think Catholics are on the same side. Arthur can correct that if I'm wrong, but yeah, there's actually a Latin phrase. He would agree. There's a Latin phrase. I wish I could look it up right now or something, but like they say every attribute has to be exactly as humans, otherwise it can't be redeemed or something like that. So at least in terms of the temptation of Jesus to sin, this was every bit as real as my temptation to sin or to do something.
I honestly do not remember my church's view on this because I've heard this is one of these things where it just depends on what time of day and what Christian you're talking to as to whether they thought that Jesus had this. I know that a large portion of Christendom does not believe that Jesus ever had the urge or desire to sin. And for temptation to be temptation, you kind of have to have a desire to do it. You got to want to do it.
The problem I have is buried right down in Scripture. If we're going with the notion that every attribute the man Jesus had is exactly like the attributes that we share, then Jesus had to sin, because there is one thing that the New Testament's very clear on, and that's that all humans sin and fall short of the glory of God. And I cannot make sense of the notion that there is a Jesus character who is all man that didn't sin in light of that idea. Now, perhaps it can be reconciled, but it doesn't make sense to me.
It's because you're looking at the fallen versus talking about humans in the fallen state on the condition of having a sinful nature, and it describes them. All humans with a sinful nature have to sin or cannot. No one seeks God and stuff like that, left to their own thing. Jesus wasn't in a fallen state. He was the human nature, morally perfect, without the stain of Adam's sin. So that this is why those verses are just a misapplication. It's comparing apples.
It seems rhetorical to call him human then, because he was human like all humans, except he wasn't anything like humans.
Okay,
I mean, the very application of the word human is only human, which is to say, we have these limitations. And if you say, well, but Jesus was human, but he didn't have any of the limitations, then I don't understand why you're using human.
I don't either. And God could have solved this problem if the problem of sin succeeds through the line of Adam, and all it took for Jesus not to sin was simply not to have the nature of Adam, this story would be a lot better told by writing Adam out of the script. And I don't mean not having him in the story. I simply mean God could have at any point started another bloodline of humans who proceeded to be perfect by simply not allowing Adam to have kids and for God to father their children the way Jesus was fathered, and we'd be done.
But that wouldn't result in as many souls as possible being saved. You would still have all the prior humans under Adam.
What, all the prior humans? You could have stopped it right at Adam's first son.
God is able of these rocks to raise up children to Abraham. God can have as many souls as he wants.
And there didn't need to be a Cain from the line of Adam. God could have entered Eve and put in a different 23 chromosomes and came out with a pure Cain instead of an Adamic Cain.
Okay, so that's where my Molinistic defeater comes in and says, how do you compare how many souls end up with salvation? So let's pretend God did that. God did a virgin birth with Eve, and out pops spotless Cain. How long before spotless Cain becomes spotful? When you have free will creatures, just because they come out spotless doesn't mean that they're not.
How long before Jesus would have ended up sinning? I mean, he left the stage pretty quick. So if you're saying, well, it's inevitable that humans would sin, it's inevitable that Jesus would have sinned.
It's not logically inevitable, but it is factually inevitable. It's just the case. It's not that they couldn't, it's just that they wouldn't. And I've made this distinction with you before. So in Jesus' case, I personally, I would say that he could sin, but he wouldn't sin. Or he, past tense, he didn't sin. If spotless Cain came out, he could remain sinless, but he wouldn't remain sinless. He didn't remain sinless if that world existed and was past tense. That's what I'm saying. And God, in his middle knowledge, knows that the exact outcome that results in the best possible results based on all the circumstantial changes. So you can say, well, what if this? What if that? What if he did this differently? But we as human beings have no way of knowing what the overall outcomes of that would be. And
okay, well, I'm still trying to figure out and understand the point of humanity, of calling Jesus human here. So part of being fully human is to be. Excuse me. Let me start that again. Part of being fully human is to be only human, and this is a thing that's kind of hard to deny. You know, I am human with certain limitations. If I could, if I were trapped in a high place, say at the top of a mountain, never mind how I got on the top of the mountain because I certainly didn't climb it. But I'm trapped there and it's cold and there's no way down. You know, if I could be a bird for a minute, I wouldn't have to worry about it. I could go to any high place and I wouldn't have to worry. But because I am human and only human, I am stuck with the human limitations, and I would be there and I would die, and I would die in fear and cold and all that because I am human and only human. And if you're saying that Jesus is human, but he wasn't only human and he could tap into this other essence that he had when he needed to, then he's not human. Once again, he's just, he can just put on and take off the human suit whenever he wants to. But that has no relationship to the actual human experience.
So I would just say it's true that Jesus was not only human. He was human. And I would deny, though, in order to be human, you don't have to only be human. You can have multiple natures. You can't just assume that to be human, you have to be only human. BS. Who said that? David Johnson, who are you to say that? So I would just deny that premise right out of the gate. Now, in terms of Jesus being able to overcome his limitations, and he does, sometimes his divine self is subliminal. So consciously, Jesus was limited. He didn't have omniscience. And I'm open to the fact that Jesus wasn't consciously aware that he was God in the flesh or had this full subliminal self. He might not have known that, and that's fine. So he was on a conscious level totally limited, like every human being. He didn't know.
When he said, "I and the Father are one," you're saying that he wasn't making an "I am God" statement?
I think in the Gospel of John, those "I am" type things are clear that Jesus was conscious of who he was.
Okay. So then I
would just
understand what you're saying about this subliminal stuff then.
Well, I just question whether those are historical. I don't think the historical Jesus said those. I think the Gospel of John it's accurate in what it's saying, but those words never escaped the historical Jesus' mouth. That's what I believe.
Well, okay. I wasn't expecting you to say that.
I'm like Craig Evans, or
3 hours and 39 minutes in. I wasn't expecting that kind of revelation, but all right.
Yeah, I don't think that it just doesn't. It seems more probable that the skeptics would the position that Jesus didn't say something like that as historically, and that's John's literary license as an ancient biographer. What he's revealing is true on the lips of Jesus, but
you're saying that John made it up.
Yeah,
okay, you can say it. You've come this far.
he made it up within the standards of ancient Greco-Roman biography and speech.
He made it up. Okay.
It's not historically accurate. I'll say that the historical Jesus probably, if you travel back in time, he didn't say that.
Okay.
But could he have made up that Jesus was human? I mean, what? Yeah.
No, I don't think that. That's different than speeches are different than doings necessarily, right? Like we had Craig Keener. Did you listen to that show, Andrew, where we had?
Yeah, I did. But this is the problem. So yes, it is absolutely true that we can say things and those things are different than actions, and that actions should take precedence. So I don't have any problem with any of that. But that requires then that we be able to demonstrate that some action actually occurred in order to give that event precedence over something that someone said. And we simply don't have any precedent for thinking that a virgin birth is possible.
Oh, how do we go back to that?
Well,
okay.
Look, so I get it.
Sorry.
So my next point we can get through quickly. We can
do a show on the virgin birth, and I'll fail miserably. I know I can't prove it, but I'll try my best to demonstrate a virgin birth.
I wouldn't do that to you.
I am not trying to create a miserable failure. The only thing that I'm trying to do is indicate why I am skeptical of the story and why I think that skepticism is reasonable in this particular case in regard to incarnation, which is the broader theme right in this part of the show. And that's all I was trying to do.
So
gotcha. Yeah, I wasn't scolding you. I was trying to be playful with you. So
moving on to the next phase, because I'm going to get through some of this. Damn it! Because people have listened to Dale talk for a long time, and they think that I probably haven't prepared for this show. I have wasted as many hours of my life in preparation for this show than Dale, and you're going to get some of it. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, one substance, many incarnations. I'm just going to skip down to the bottom of this and see if I can't get a quick agreement on this. Would you say that God in his current form is made up of two substances?
So he's one substance, but you're talking about like Jesus' physical human.
That's right. Let's make this easy. Okay, we talked about substance earlier. We talked about the God substance before Jesus. We talked about human nature now, and Jesus has both. You would agree that God is made up of two substances, yes?
So no. So God, the Trinity is one substance,
easy.
spiritual substance. the human body is kind of like so pretend you have that dodgeball, that's the soul, remember? And then you stick on you glue on a little tennis ball on top of the ball. That's Jesus' physical human body. It's an add-on. It's not incorporated into the essence of the spirit.
You said that the substance of God was equivalent to, at least for talking points, the body, the human body. And so the God body substance thing, whatever that is that you're saying that God, the soul God thing with the three people in it is made of, I'm giving you that and saying, but there's another substance that's separate, different from that he's also made of. Why can't you just say yes?
Because God isn't made of that substance. God being the Trinity or whatever, he's just the one substance. But yes, there is a God the Son does have a physical body up in heaven right now. So
that's a human body, right? Not just physical. It's a human body. Yes.
Yes.
In a human body,
it's a resurrected
it's a different
human body.
Substance. Don't Pat. Not dealing with resurrected. Just leave that alone. We're rambling toward 4 hours. There will be no more talk of resurrection.
I am just trying to give Dale the words and view that he really has, though, because
so
you
forget
do
it.
better than I do. So yeah,
it's a human body. And that's a different substance than God's substance. And God now is stuck. And by God, I mean the first definition of God is in the Trinity. The three people are stuck with a human body as a part of their substance.
No, so in Mariology is the study. Okay, well, I would just say no. That's
this is
no
so
flaw.
obvious. Why? Okay, go ahead. Why? Why?
So in Mariology, that's the study of parts and wholes and their relations between each other, right? So sometimes a whole, such as the Trinity, doesn't have a property, even if its individual members do. And I gave an example of that. I forgot what it is now. My brain is fried at this point. We're almost at 4 hours. But or sometimes the whole does have a property in light of its individual members. Sometimes the whole has a property that its individual members don't have. So it's not necessarily the case that, okay, well, God the Son is a part of two substances, the spiritual soul, the Trinity, and he has his physical substance, his resurrected human body. Thank you, Andrew.
I really was just trying to be fair. You know?
I know. I got to work on my sarcasm to. So yeah, it's not necessarily the case. I get that you're trying to say, well, look, now because Jesus, God the Son, has a physical substance as one of his properties, therefore the whole Trinity has this substance because that's a part of the whole. I would just say that's not necessarily the case in terms of how it would work out Mariologically.
Okay.
But yeah, go ahead.
Let's just jump to the next one. I don't feel.
Look, I hate to be the dirty centrist skeptic here. I hate to be that guy, but I actually do understand that point. I do. It's possible, for instance, for some numbers in a number set to have different properties than other numbers in the same set.
But the set would consist of those different properties. So Dale defined God in the first level of definition as the Trinity, as all three, not any one individual. And so the threeness is a part of the God, and they share one substance. But God has been infected with a second substance.
Okay, so
At some level, God
let's let Andrew come back.
Has the human substance. Okay.
So let me try to use an example here and see if this is what Dale is driving at. So if I had a partial number set like 5, 6, and 7, okay, and that's the total of the sets. We've got a trinity of numbers, 5, 6, and 7. The numbers 5 and 7 happen to be prime numbers. They are only divisible by themselves and the number 1. The number 6, on the other hand, is a composite number. And so while it is part of that Trinitarian set, it does have properties that the other two numbers don't have.
Gotcha. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Andrew. We'll have you believing in the virgin birth in no time.
Don't
push
your
it.
breath.
How does that not prove my point? Anyway, I don't look. So
I'm not saying it's dispositive of the case.
This
I'm
Trinity has more substance than what it had before the Incarnation. The Incarnation, you could say it had one substance. Post-Incarnation, you can't say that. And so
I did my best. I did my best to put a good face on it.
Right. I mean, your whole set of numbers, you can say, well, 5 and 7, this whole set had prime numbers, but now we added a 6. Now you can't say the whole set is just one set of prime numbers. Can't say it anymore.
That's not what I said.
But I'm taking that, trying to show that you can't now just add a human body to the eternal God and say, no, it's still the same substance that it was before you added that.
Yeah, so I think the analogy works abstractly, whereas when you start talking about substance, we have an intuition, and I think maybe it's an intuition even shared by the three of us. Though Dale, I don't want to speak for you, but I think that our intuition is that hydrogen can be hydrogen and oxygen can be oxygen, but once you put them together, they're water. And you have to do something particularly to break them apart again. Once you get them close together, they become something different. And so I don't know that that's quite as good an analogy as 5, 6, and 7 in terms of different properties. But I think we do have this sort of intuition about substances. That once you get two substances together, they're no longer the two different things that they were. There's something new.
There are emergent properties, right? Like the H2O wetness is a property that the whole has. That. Oh, sorry, Dave.
No, I was just agreeing.
So let's just
move on. Sorry.
Let's try it. This is.
Where are you?
This is killing me. It doesn't matter where I am. Here we are. We are here.
Okay.
The human nature has limitations that the divine nature does not have. Is that a true statement?
Yes.
Okay. And God now has a human nature.
God the Son does, yeah.
Okay. So does that introduce a limitation to God that he did not have?
No.
Why not?
Because his divine nature is still preserved intact subliminally, right? So this is where I was getting into.
Then in what way does he have a human nature?
His conscious mind is embodied in that human body.
Well, is that a limiting factor or not?
It's a limiting factor for his conscious mind, but not his.
Are you saying that he's stuck in that body? He can't shape shift into other things now? He can't extend his consciousness to other places? What are you saying he's limited in?
The subconscious logos could at any time pop out of the body, become actively omnipotent, turn into a bird. It can do anything at every single time. So omnipotence isn't gotten; it's just converted to a potential or subliminal mode, I guess, rather than being something active in terms of him consciously being aware. So the conscious mind of Jesus is limited. If he doesn't know he's God, he doesn't know he can turn himself into a bird. He does
right now. I don't mean when he was on the earth.
Right so no,
now.
He's okay. No, he is actively conscious. Put it this way: his entire divine, the Logos is entirely conscious. There are no subliminal divine properties anymore. He just has so now he's kind of like he was back in the Old Testament, except it's not a mere human body; it's a resurrected human body.
Is he stuck in this body, or can he shed it whenever he wants to?
I think, so he can obviously shed it. He did during his biological death. I don't think that he will ever shed it. This is part of. He could.
He's wearing it like a suit.
He can get rid of the body at any time, and he did.
Then what use is it to say that he has a divine and a human nature?
Well, it goes back to the atonement. The human nature is necessary for the atonement to be effective.
Well, you can say it was necessary then, but why is it necessary now?
I think the resurrected, why does he have this resurrected human nature? It's because, again, it's for our atonement. He's mirroring what we are going to be going through. We're going to be like him. We're going to have resurrected bodies like him.
Okay, but he's just wearing a human suit, though. He doesn't need it. It's just an avatar. He's not human. We've already been. He's God. He's fully God. He doesn't have any of the limitations that we humans do. And so if you say, but he's fully human even now, then you have to say that he has some kind of limitations now. This was the purpose of the questions leading up to this, and a part of the whole incoherence of this thing. You can't say that he's fully uninhibited because he's got the divine nature, but he's fully human and inhibited. So one of those two things has to give. He's either inhibited or he's not inhibited.
And if I might, while you're right on that point, there's a miracle that I'm recalling perhaps incorrectly because it's been a while since I read the passage, but maybe the two of you can help me out. Jesus is wandering through a crowd, and a woman comes up, and she's scared to face him directly or to ask him to be healed in person, and so she comes up behind him, and she touches the hem of his garment, and his power goes out of him, and she's healed right away. The mere touch of his clothing, and so it doesn't appear, at least in that case, that Jesus is anything like human.
Is anything like what? Sorry.
He's not anything like a human. And this is while he's incarnate, right? I mean,
and he knew that the power had gone out of him too, so
right.
he knew what happened.
Right.
So
in fact, he looks around for her to talk to her directly.
Yeah. So there are places where the subconscious divine logos leaks out, right? Just like our subconscious mind will leak into.
But he knew it. He did know it consciously, though. That's key here.
He knew that the divine power was taken out of him from this act or something like that. So that would be an example of the conscious mind becoming aware of a subconscious thing. Similarly, he predicted the future about the temple. Well, this is the superhuman subconscious logos leaking through and giving him conscious knowledge of certain things. But at no time was Jesus, during his time of humiliation, fully consciously omniscient. He was limited in that sense while he was here on earth, at least.
So, once again, I'm trying to get a handle on how is he limited now. Then, if he's to be fully human, is to at least have some kind of limitation. So, even if you say he's not being tempted to sin right now, which I don't know why why he wouldn't be. But in what way is he fully human, other than just having some useless human suit that he can discard anytime he wants to?
Yeah, I had an answer for that, but I'm second guessing it now. So in Jesus's post-ascension state, he has a human body. I was going to say he goes back to being kind of like the Old Testament theophanies. It's all fake. He's really Superman masquerading as a regular human being. I'm not sure. I'm not sure now, because if he's within the confines of a human brain, the human brain can't handle omniscience. So is it fair to say that Jesus is still subconsciously omniscient, and God is still consciously omniscient in light of God the Father and God the Holy Spirit? I don't know. I believed up until now that once Jesus ascended, he became fully consciously omniscient. He regained those things, but I'm not sure now. So yeah, I'll just have to say I have to think about that. I might be wrong about what I believed before. Maybe he's still subconsciously omniscient and just consciously knows a lot of stuff, whereas God the Father and the Holy Spirit are consciously omniscient.
Okay, so I'm going to give our two remaining listeners a break. And not go further into my questions, and just say consider this my closing statement. I actually get the last word, but I don't even need it. So I'll just make it now. This stuff is batshit crazy. I'm sorry. So the longer we talked, and I anticipated a long discussion here, and I wanted to stretch it out as long as necessary to give the Christian a chance to make the best possible case he could make, and I wanted to ask enough questions so that I could make sure that I got the best descriptions and explanations that I could. From him. This is one of these cases where the more the Christian talks, the less sense it makes. And so I actually don't mind letting Christians talk for a long time on some of this stuff. There is a reason why so many hundreds, perhaps thousands, of people have lost their lives in bloody crusades over this one issue. Okay, it's all headcanon all the way down. It's all arguing about Harry Potter spells, as far as I'm concerned. There's no way, in fact, for one Christian to say to another Christian, no, my idea about the nature of God is true, and I can prove it, as opposed to your idea about the nature of God. And so really the winner of that is the one with the biggest sword, and who isn't afraid to use it. So yeah, this is why there's so much bloodshed over this, and there is a good reason why even someone as esteemed as my colleague Dale believes that most Christians, that constitutes at least 51, possibly 53.4% of Christians, have a heretical view. There's a significance to that number, people. Sorry, I flubbed it. Most of you will know what it is. There's a reason why he thinks that they would have a heretical view. One of the questions that I intended to ask him at the beginning of the show, and maybe he will answer it in his close, is what percentage of Christians do you believe agree with your particular view of the Trinity, have your precise view? I'm curious about that. The fact of the matter is, there is room for lots of Trinities, lots of views of the Trinity, because there's no way to make this story make enough sense so that everyone agrees on the same version of the Trinity. 3 in 1. Stop there. A three-headed beast. This in no way, by the way, represents a good version of the Trinity. People I grew up would have probably called that a heresy. But, if we just want to say the words, 3 persons in one, 3 who's, 1 what, and then we break for lunch, we would be fine. But the moment you start breaking that apart and asking the next logical question and forcing people to actually try to understand what that really means, it breaks down completely into utter incoherence. Every part of this, I could have asked 10 more questions that would have demonstrated the incoherence of this idea. And the deeper it goes, the more incoherent it is. And so my job really isn't to convince anyone that the Trinity isn't true. I don't care. Honestly, I don't care if you say your God has 3 heads on 2 bodies and 1 metachlorian substance. It does not matter to me. It's your story. You do you. But if you're asking me, is it coherent? Does it make logical sense? The answer is no, absolutely not. And if that's important to you, then you ought to stop being a Christian right now, because it doesn't make any sense. And I can tell you, when I was a Christian, it didn't make any sense to me either, okay? Confession time. No, I wasn't a hypocrite. I just didn't think that it had to make sense. I didn't think it had to make sense because, it's one of those mysteries. God is 3 in 1. Okay, paradox, big deal. Mary was a pregnant virgin. Paradox, big deal. We lived with paradox all the time. And all paradox was some impossible thing that couldn't happen that we wrote off as God. Well, God's God, and he can do anything, and so we don't have to understand it. We just have to believe it. God told Abraham to kill his kid, but God is good God who tempts no man with evil. Paradox. So what? Just have the faith, believe in it, go to the country buffet after that, and enjoy your day. That's how you should deal with this stuff. The moment you deal with it with any level of seriousness beyond that, then you end up with incoherence. And if that is important to you, it wasn't to me, but if it's important to you, then we're going to make room on the skeptic side of skeptics and seekers. We welcome you with open arms. Enjoy the buffet.
All right. Andrew, did you have a closing statement or anything?
Very briefly. So I guess the first thing I'd start with is where I started at the beginning of this show. And thank you both for having me on. I deeply appreciate it.
Having you and Emma on.
Yes, well, yes.
I actually invited Emma, and Andrew just insisted on hogging the mic, is how this worked out.
Well, she's got really short arms, so it's easy to hold it over her head. Sorry, that's a 4-month-old joke for people who didn't get it. So I'll close this largely where I started. Don't confuse the map for the place. We've all been in cars and using a navigator. At least the story is broadly enough told that we know that navigators can be wrong on the facts. And the only way to know whether you're confusing the map for the place is to go and look. And right now, there's no way to go and test the Christian story. It may or may not be true, but the time to believe in a thing is not when you have an argument for it, not when you have a handwritten map. The time to believe the thing is when you're there. And that brings me to the last part of my close. I don't care much about this discussion over the Trinity. I appreciate being able to be part of it, but it wasn't a big deal to me as a Christian, and it's not a big deal to me as a skeptic, because this doesn't get to the heart of the Christian claims that Christians need you, the listeners, to believe. And what are those claims? That there's a God that can live forever, that there's a God that does or does not have an eternal torture chamber waiting for you, that there's a God that has the capacity to rightly judge every person and draw a line down the middle between the good and the bad, that there's a God that can know all things, that there's a God that is all powerful. All of those things are central claims that remain to be demonstrated, and the time to believe them is only once they have been. That's how I found my way to the exit. And while I think this conversation was incredibly interesting, and Dale, I appreciate how deeply you look into these things. It's those central claims that got me to the door. And once again, thank you both for letting me come on. I love Skeptics and Seekers, and I deeply appreciate you both.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, you're welcome back anytime. As I said, same with Matt as well. We haven't mentioned him. I appreciate and respect him. So we're all a team. You guys are, as long as David's cool with that. But.
Oh no, I'd love to have Matt on as a guest sometime. Yeah, I would have loved to have Matt on to take care of the 4th hour of the show and give me a break. So I mean.
Yeah, I'm going to try to get, as you know, David, I want to get, so with Andrew, if I can get J.P. Moreland to come on to discuss substance dualism, we can do that. And for Matt, I know he's interested in evolution. So I think I could, I have contacts with William Dembski and Michael Behe. Dembski, he's the one it's probably going to be Behe if anything. But yeah, so like I have plans to bring Matt on. You're welcome on the show if I can get Behe to agree to come on. So yeah, great show, guys. For my closing. So yeah, what are the threads? Totally forgot. What are the threads with this coherence of the Trinity and Incarnation that I want you guys to get? Trinity and Incarnation for Dummies. The summarized version of what I'm saying with all this. So look, the Old and New Testament, the scriptural data gives us this, the 2 elements. There are 3 distinct individuals or persons that are said to be divine. They all share one identity, Yahweh. There is one God, only one God worthy of being worshipped. That's it. If you recognize that, then you are saved. As to asking the next part, the what question that we focused on, what does that mean? How do we make sense of this biblical data? You don't have to be afraid of getting things wrong. Maybe my model's wrong. Maybe group mind monotheism is correct, and I'm mistaken in my advocating for Trinity monotheism, which, by the way, David, for your answer, just as a rough guess or estimation, I would say that, believe it or not, my view is the majority view on the Trinity. For Christians that have thought about this. So I'm consistent with the creeds, right? The Chalcedon Creed, which is a major thing that covers Catholics, blah, blah, blah. Orthodox and Protestants, which is the majority of the church. Incarnation, probably not so much. I'm probably in minority view in advocating for this partialism type notion. So yeah, I don't know. I think I would be the majority view, but maybe Arthur, if you're listening and you know the stats, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But yeah, so don't be afraid to engage in this knowing about God's nature, grappling with these hard issues. It's not meant to be easy. It's a challenge. I mean, we're trying to adjudicate the nature of an infinite God. What do you expect? Of course, we would expect confusion, and that's good. That's good for human beings to grow, develop, and learn more about the wonderful nature of our heavenly Father, our heavenly God, to use the proper term. So yeah, I think I would just want to implore you guys that this is an essential doctrine. This strikes at the heart of Christianity, Jesus' deity. This is why I get to look at Jehovah's Witnesses and say, you're going to hell. You're not a Christian. You can use those words. You can profess being a Christian, but you're not one. You deny an essential biblical doctrine that Jesus is Yahweh, that he shares that divine identity. So yeah, hopefully you guys have learned some things. I don't have answers to everything. Nothing David or Andrew have said have shown that my notion is incoherent. They pointed out some further elements that I haven't thought about, where I've had to go, I don't know about this or that. But that doesn't mean that they've proven something's incoherent just because I don't have an answer to that. The parts that I do know about are coherent. God is 3 persons or minds within one spiritual substance, a soul, just like Kerberos is like that in a physical way. Secondly, the incarnation. God is one person with two complete natures. He has all the essential properties of the divine nature, all the essential properties of the human nature within the one person. He's like a cup, one cup with water and oil that don't mix. So yeah, thank you guys for listening. Thank you for putting up with my long blogs. Thank you to David and Andrew for giving me some substantive exchange and challenge on this, and for both of you guys being real seekers and doing your best to grapple with this, and you came away disagreeing. I respect that. Yeah.
All right, and next week, I have no earthly idea. But it's gonna be better than this show. God damn it! So, wait a minute. Cut. Next week.
This is my favorite show of the season. This is my favorite show of the season. Just so you know.
God. Just shoot me. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you both.
All right. Yeah. Good show, guys. Thanks for doing that. I appreciated